Welcome back, everyone. I hope you and your families are doing well. So this time we're going to discuss converting from an NSG 370 to an AX15 on my Jeep TJ. Now, if you don't know, the NSG 370 is a 6-speed transmission that started coming in Jeeps around 2005, while the AX15 is a 5-speed transmission that was in many different vehicles around the world. It ran for a long time. You can still buy them new today, and that stopped coming in TJs specifically around 1999. Now, what I want to do is I want to go over some reasons why you would want to switch and some difficulties in switching if you have an 06 or 05 Wrangler like I do. And also some of the parts you're going to need. Now, I can't go over every single part you're going to need because I haven't done the conversion yet, and this will be my first time. But in the series of videos that we do, I'm going to film everything. That way, if there's an issue that we come across, you'll be able to see how to tackle that issue, so you'll be able to buy the parts ahead of time if this is a conversion you'll want to do for you. I'm also going to film what it's like having that transmission versus the 6-speed. Since I have extensive use, I've driven the Jeep for 110,000 miles now with the 6-speed, and then I'll be able to tell you what the difference is between the 6-speed and the 5-speed as far as driving goes. But before we do all of that and get into those videos, let's just go over some basic differences in gear ratios and why you'd want to switch between these two transmissions and what you're going to need. Here is the NSG 370. This is the one out of my Jeep, and here's what it looks like. Ta-da! Now, some common problems with this transmission. In 2005, the reverse gear would like to pop out of gear. It was a pretty big problem, but in 2006, they remedied that issue. They came up with a fix for it, and if you have one of these transmissions, you most likely don't have that problem anymore because the dealer would have replaced the transmission or rebuilt it if you would have brought it back to them. Now, the more common problem and much harder to repair are the synchros going out, and typically 1 through 2nd likes to go out, and 3rd through 4th. I have 1 through 4th gear synchros completely going out, and they're not up to the point where you can't shift it, but the transmission is very crunchy and not very enjoyable to shift going down the road. And for that reason, it makes the drivability kind of hard, honestly. Another common problem with these is in front of the bell housing up here. There is a expansion plug, and the plug likes to crack and leak. And unfortunately, it's a $2 part. They're kind of hard to get a hold of, and you have to pull the entire transmission out in order to get to it. Those are really the biggest common problems with these things, and it's not that they don't ever stop working because they're a manual transmission, but they kind of just degrade faster and faster as you put the miles on them. Me personally, I also have an input bearing going out, and that poses a big problem with this specific transmission because they're very expensive to repair. And so in order to get that input bearing out of this transmission, you have to split the entire case because they're integrated bell housing. And when you split the entire case, you have to have special tools and stands to essentially it's a bench to hold the guts of the transmission together while you work on it to do a rebuild. Now, the tools are quite pricey. If you have a shop where you can build it, if you can find one that will rebuild it, they charge quite a lot of money. So that pretty much leaves you with a remand or new. Now, from my research, a new one of these 6 speeds was around $4,000 to $5,000. A remanufactured one was around $3,000, really $3,000 the lowest I can be. So they're pretty expensive to get a hold of if you have to replace it, which is why we're going to do the conversion. So that's a bit about this transmission. That's some of the problems I have with it, and that's why I'm replacing it. It's a cost thing. Now, we'll go with some pretty big positives on this transmission. One, it's got 6 gears. That's really nice in a Jeep. It gives you one more gear option for driving down the highway, climbing mountains, off-road. The gear ratios are pretty nice. The spread isn't too far apart. 6th gear is my only problem with this, is it's not very tall. It's a 0.84. So it's pretty deep overdrive, to be honest. Most transmissions are 79 or lower. Which, if you don't know what that just means that on this transmission versus a typical 5-speed, you're going to have a much higher RPM going down the highway, especially if you re-gear like I have. But the real hero of this transmission is the 1st gear. It's very low. It's 4.42 to 1, which the AX15 is 3.82, and I believe the NV 3550 is somewhere around like 4, which is in between these two transmissions. So it's a really nice 1st gear, especially if you have a Rubicon transfer case and deeper gearing. You get a real nice low 1st gear, which is pretty awesome for crawling. That is the biggest decision I had to make if I wanted to get rid of that 1st gear. And for me, I'd rather have a little bit taller 1st gear and a much better transmission overall than a deeper first gear and just a worse transmission. So now that we're done looking at this, let's go take a look at the AX15, the new one, and I'll tell you some things about that, and then we'll go over why I'm specifically doing this conversion, and then what tools you'll need. Okay, so here it is, your AX15, and as you can see, it's a totally different shape and looks completely different than the other transmission. One, it's missing the bell housing, which makes this a completely adaptable transmission to very many builds and other engines out there. It's why it's so commonly used. It's commonly put behind V8 swaps in many vehicles as well. It's a really well-designed transmission, sought after. Toyota uses that transmission a lot, or they used to in their vehicles. Toyota guys really like this thing and really don't have a problem with it. From what I understand, these newer versions have almost no problems that I can find. No one really has a problem with it. They like running it. It shifts pretty smooth. And it's an all-around good transmission. Now, in the 80s and 90s, people will talk about how bad this transmission was in their Jeep that they owned, but that's really not the transmission's fault. And the reason for that is Jeep misprinted the oil spec in the owner's manual for this thing. And they used completely wrong oil, and they never fixed it, never really told me about it from what I can understand. So because of that, if you had one of these in your Jeep and you used the oil specified in the owner's manual for this thing, and you had a lot of problems with it, it was probably because Jeep did that and not because of you or how you took care of the transmission. It's overall a pretty good transmission. Those are really the only problems with this thing. So I've driven one. They drive really nice. The gear ratios are not quite as low in the first gear as the 6-speed. Like I said, it's like a 3.83 first gear, versus the 6-speed is a 4.42. So you don't have quite as good of a crawl ratio, but again, I'm willing to give up a little bit of crawl ratio for a much better transmission. What you do gain on this one, though, besides the strength and a better transmission, is you do gain the overdrive gear being a bit taller, which is nicer for the highway. It gets a little bit better fuel mileage. And if you're running deeper gears like I am, just keeps that RPM down a little bit. These upgraded versions from Advanced Adapters, and I think you can get one from, I don't remember the company, but there's a few other companies you can get them. They're not the same transmission of the 80s and 90s. They're full alloy internals. So they're completely upgraded. You can still buy them new today, and they're overall pretty nice. Let's go over some differences and what you're going to need to put this transmission inside of a 0506 TJ. That way you'll know kind of what you're getting into. And again, these are only the issues that I've come across doing all this research for the past 8 months. When we actually get into putting this in, I'm expecting to run into a few problems, and we'll tackle those together as we run into them. That way you'll know if you want to do this conversion exactly what you're getting into. So let me go over a few parts that you're going to need and some differences that are right off the bat with this transmission. So the first minor problem that you're going to run into when you're converting your 05 or 06 TJ to this transmission is your reverse light plug. The plug is different, and so you're simply not going to be able to plug that in. My fix for this is to pull this plug apart and go get a different Deutsch style plug and put that plug on here and on the Jeep, and then I will just have a different connector to connect these. So that's going to be my fix for this. That's issue number one. Okay, so issue number two, or the fix for issue number two, I should say, is this bell housing. Now, this is from Advanced Adapters, and this one is really crucial because it puts the CPS in the correct location, so you can just plug in the CPS from your Jeep. You don't have to worry about trying to dig any holes or try to rewire anything. It just puts it right in the factory location, so it'll work. Note that I think it's Hesco or something like that does make a relocation kit that you can put on the front of the motor of the TJ, but it's known to not be very good at a high RPM. Lower RPM, it's fine, but once you start driving down the highway and stuff, it's known to throw an engine code. Something to do with the timing and the wheel in the front that it mounts to. It has a hard time, so it's not the best way to do it. This is the correct way to do it to keep that CPS location in the factory spot. With this bell housing, one thing you do have to do, or you should do from what I'm understanding, there's where the CPS is going to go, is that we will need to mount this first, put our sensor in there, and then measure the distance to make sure it's correct so we don't have to adjust it or shim it or anything, just to make sure it was built correctly before I put the whole thing together. But it is milled and machined to spec, so it should be just fine. We're just going to double check it just to make sure. Now, the other things that you're going to need are going to be small things, and we'll show you two more parts, or one other part, and then one other thing about the transmission that you're going to need. Okay, So the other thing about this transmission that you'll notice is that this shifting tower uses a square connection. The tower on an NSG 370 uses a circle with one side shaved off. So it's completely different. You're going to need a different shifter to make this happen. Huge recommendation here. Go to Advanced Adapters and get their shifter. It's like $28. They give you the shifter knob and everything you need. Versus if you go to, I can't remember the name of the company at the moment, but I'll put a link to it if you want to look at. Their shifter for this thing is something like $178. So you're definitely saving a lot more money going with Advanced Adapters than you are with the other company. I see no reason that you need a $180 shifter, which also, by the way, has to be bent. I'm not sure that the one from Advanced Adapters will have to be bent, but I do know it's only 30 bucks versus 180 when I did this. So that's one of the differences. Now let me show you the part you're going to need to really install this correctly. And basically it's just a clutch kit. All right, so here's the clutch kit, and this is the shifter handle you get from Advanced Adapters. I just wanted to show you it real quick. It's pretty nice. They say they built them in-house, and there's your knob. For $28, you can't go wrong, and it should just work. We might have to bend it a little bit. I know the $178 one that I was referring to, that one you do have to bend, so obviously it's a much cheaper option. This is the clutch kit. Now, a word of advice on the clutch kits. I really recommend the Luke kits. They're the factory replacement. That's what the factory puts in there is Luke. Now you can do center force. I don't like those. They're really more of a racing clutch, and they become like a hair trigger. And a racing clutch in a Jeep doesn't make sense because you want to be able to slip the clutch. You need to if you're off-roading or rock crawling. You don't want such a positive fix, especially if you're rock crawling. You don't really have a problem with the Luke kits holding either. The Jeep just doesn't really produce enough power to slip the clutch when it's fully engaged. And I have a clutch that I can show you that I pulled out, and it's got a lot of miles on it and a lot of slipping, and I've smoked it quite a few times, and it still grabs and it fixes just fine. It doesn't look like it does, but it does. There's really no problems with it. I'm just replacing it because I have everything here. So in this kit you get everything you need. It's 95 bucks. You get your throwout bearing, your alignment tool, you get your clutch disc, you get everything that you need. I have an extra part in here because I'm going to replace the fork while I'm here, but you don't have to. The nice thing about this conversion that we're doing is all the parts are just parts that Jeep has used over the past 10 years in a TJ. You don't have to buy anything special. So with that, the clutch kit, you'll just always get a clutch kit for 99 or 97 to 2006 TJ, and it'll work. So really, that's the only thing you have to go out and buy special. It's not from Advanced Adapters that I know of so far. Okay, so that's all the pieces that I have so far, and that's the differences between the two transmissions. Honestly, I'm doing this conversion because the NSG 370, buying it brand spanking new, is pretty expensive. It's around $5,000 is what I was able to find it for. And the AX15, the transmission itself is only $1,600, but I'm into the conversion so far, $2,300. Now that's not to say that price will go up a little bit if I run into problems and I have to buy other parts, which we'll definitely film. And any fixes that I do, I'll show you how I fix them. That way you can decide if this conversion is for you or not. But I'm willing to bet that even if you had a shop do this conversion, you're probably still going to be cheaper than the full replacement of this transmission. The other thing too is I just don't think the 6-speed is reliable transmission. It's known to have a lot of problems. It's known to not last very long. As you can see, it's only got 110,000 miles on it, and we're already replacing it. And I've owned my Jeep since I had 10,000 miles on it, and so I've put the 100,000 plus miles on the thing. So I'm really familiar with how this transmission should shift, how it felt when it was new, how it feels now, what you can do with it off-road and on-road. Any fixes that it need, I've done myself on it. So like the expansion plugs and clutches and everything. So I'm familiar with how the transmission should operate. And let me know in the comments or leave a like if you want a video where I do a trip pretty much right after I get this conversion done and I know everything is right. I'm going to do a 1,000-mile trip in the Jeep. It's going to be only highway for the most part. I might hit a few dirt trails just to see. But let me know if you want me to film that and let you know my thoughts on what the transmission feels like, the 5-speed versus the 6-speed, since I have so much experience with the 6-speed. I really want to see what it's going to be like when I get that 5-speed in there, how the Jeep is going to feel, especially with how it's configured. I think it's going to be nicer. With that though, guys, if you have any questions, always hit those comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Oh, and don't forget to hit subscribe or hit that bell so that way you know when the next videos come. And we're not done with the heat issue either. We're going to work on that. Just obviously I can't work on the heat issue with no transmission in the Jeep. All right, guys, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.